Good afternoon, everyone from Dunrovin Ranch in Lolo, Montana. First of all, have a very happy New Year. We're celebrating here in Montana with some wonderful sunshine and snow. Now, I will say that I can't think of a better way to start the new year than with two of my best friends and my best guys in my life. Brandon Carpenter from Hashknife Ranch, which everybody knows. Give us a wave, Brandon. And his wonderful son, Kalen, who comes to us from Kentucky right now. And we're going to start the new year off with one of Brandon's videos from the Hashknife Ranch. And it's been kind of an unusual year for you, hasn't it, Brandon? Can you give us some of the context of what you're going to be showing us?
Well, yeah, it's been a really tough year, and we're not the only ones. This is something that's pretty indicative of a lot of people in agriculture right now. And fact is, in real time, you're hearing a lot about the markets and price of meat to the consumer and where it's at. And this is kind of a good start of a small piece of that as to why we're in the spot we're in. And this was actually done in August, and it's about us not having enough grass, enough money to buy hay, enough hay, and even availability for hay, and then some of the alternatives of the choices we have to make when that happens. And it hasn't happened very often, but occasionally it does.
Well, I look forward to seeing that video. It's an issue that is in the front of everybody's mind who has livestock here in Montana, including ours. The price of hay this year was just out of sight. And following our conversation with Brandon, I'm going to turn to Kalen for one of his wonderful stories that really dovetails with what you're going to be talking about, and that is, children's involvement in the family business. So let's start with your video, Brandon. I think it's called Culling the Herd. Is that not correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. Can you let her roll, James?
Hey, good morning from the Hashknife. Well, it's first part of August, and a little bit different activity today, what we normally have to do. But we're in a drought situation, and we've got a bunch of pests like grasshoppers that have eaten up all of our winter pasture. So it's been hot temperatures and not a lot of hay growth around the country. So the price of hay is 3, 4, 5 times what it normally is, if you're stupid enough to pay that 5 times, because it's worth more than what a cow is worth. So we've made some decisions, and part of it is we have to cull a bunch of the herd back because we can't feed them. We can't afford to feed them, and that's just the way it is. Everybody's in the same spot. We're no different. Everybody's run their place a little bit differently because of the assets that they have, meaning the grass, whether they got some hay to put up themselves or not. And we don't. We find it more efficient to graze, and has worked out very well for us. But in a year like this, even the guys who've got irrigated ground are having to cull their herd back too. So this is a morning where it's not all that fun. Everybody's a little bit on the grumpy side because we know what this means. It's you work for decades to try to build a herd and improve your genetics, make a good product for those that are wanting a good piece of meat across the counter. And now we see it go down the road earlier than it should. We shouldn't be doing anything until the first part of October, where we would wean our calves from the cows and then sell the calves, preg test the cows, and of course cull some of the ones that are of an age that you're not going to keep, or you just don't like the way they're producing a calf, things like that. So with that not being a normal year, here we are, and we're not going to sell these calves. We're going to sell the cows and the calves. We got to sell some pairs. And so we're going to gather up a bunch of them this morning. We're going to be moving them around to different pieces of grass where we still have grass that was not really affected by the hoppers much because it's native grass. And they're not seeming to get their pinchers onto that native grass and eat it up like they are this improved grass that we have on our winter pasture. So which we have none. So this is kind of where we're at this morning, and even this horse is a little bit growly. You hear him talking and moaning and groaning, so we'll take you on this ride with us. Well, as you can see, we're moving these cows. It's cool. Lisa's in the front after we got them gathered, and they gathered pretty quickly because they're thinking that they can find some better grass and be a little bit happier. They're not in horrible shape. A couple of them that aren't doing well, but calves are actually looking pretty good. But the value is going to drop quickly because everybody's going to market because they got no grass like we do. So we're going to try to stay ahead of our losses. It's about, we know we're going to lose again this year, but we're going to try to minimize that loss as much as possible. So here we head to the corral. And we're at another pasture here, gathering up some more cows. Got that first bunch sent to the corral and did some sorting in our good corrals. And now it's a matter of gathering some of these guys up, as we got some older cows that need to go, and we'll bring them in, sort them off, and do the same thing. Get ready to take them to town this coming week. And Lisa's up there ahead in that side by side with that grain, like the Pied Piper. They really appreciate that grain coming out of that, and it does make it a little easier to gather sometimes, especially when it's a little bit cool. These cows, they really like that cow cake. So you know what, I kind of cheat when it's just me on horseback and I got a limited number of horses, just the one that's under me. I can't ride more than one, well, at a time. Lisa's got most everybody kind of held up there at these old corrals, and they're in tough shape, but they work with a little bit of patching here and there and everywhere. So we're trying to just ease them in there so we don't lose them, and she's doing a good job of holding up, getting most of them together, and then enticing them in there, and we'll kind of reward them with a little cake when they get in there and settle them down a little bit before we start working them. And this is not working too bad. Yeah, we got everybody in, and now it's time to sort what we're going to cull and take to town out of this little bunch of cows and calves. All right, so we're kind of sorting these cows and calves off. Out. Out. I don't know what this, yeah, calf is out. This cow, I'm not sure. Out. Good job. Good catch. I couldn't see her. She snuck by me. All right. And we know by which ear tag who we want ahead of time. I've already went through some of these. And we know by age class that they got to either stay or go. The older cows are going to go because they're of less value long term. So getting them cows and calves off, sort these guys out, and here's a calf. Nice calf, but it's going to have to go. This one goes in. Number 34, right? Yep, she goes in. Nice calf, but the cow's older, so she's got to go. This is the problem. Hard decisions. Bad decisions. All right. Out. What's that? This cow number. All right. Cow goes out.
Come on, this time go. Go.
Cow. And old cow, but look at the size of this calf. It's one of her old favorites. Out.
Are you playing merry-go-round?
And she kind of is. She thinks there's some feed in here for her. Well, we got some movement around, shuffling cows and cull cows and heifers, and so we're just going to take this little bunch down here to water and hopefully call it a day until we start this whole process of sending everybody to town in a few days. Hasn't worked out too bad. Been all right. Gotten some no wrecks that happened, and everybody's healthy, moving, and happy to go to water. All right, we've got these cows loaded, coming to town, and gonna bring them in here to stockyards, get them unloaded, and hope for good prices. All we got left. All right, come on, kids. Come on out. Come on out. There we go. Come on, cow. Come on, girls. Come on, ladies. Come on, ladies. Let's go. Let's go.
Last load. Hi, girls. Hi, kids. Hi, kids. Hi, kids. Come on, babies.
Well, after a long day, all the pairs that we wanted to go to town with are in, and what you see is a leftover empty trailer and needs to be cleaned up. You know, things continue. You got to look at this whole not having grass, not having hay, and having to pare back in a time where the markets are low, overhead's high. You know, we're paying 3, 4, and in some cases for some people 5 times more for our hay this year than what's normal because of the supply and demand of it. And there's some gouging going on. There's no denying that. But I have to look at this as an opportunity as well. It's not all doom and gloom. It's painful, it hurts, but this may be the premature strategy enactment that I've got. I was going to wait until next year to cull some of these older cows back. Well, I'm forced to this year. And not just the older cows, but you got to dig deep and do some of those that aren't quite perfect. The ones that aren't, the feet aren't quite what you want. You might have some white on the bag. The bag isn't quite even. Some things like that. Disposition isn't quite where you want it. They're a little bit inefficient in their eating and caring for themselves. All of those small things like that, which aren't small, but together with an entire herd, if you pick on one of those things to make a decision to cull your herd out, that's a big deal. So I'm looking at how we can improve this, how we can take advantage of this, poor circumstance and make the best of it. And like I said, an opportunity. So we'll improve the overall health of our herd. And by that, I mean, we're going to have just the select best cows left over. And then if we can hang on to them, we're spending some money on them. We're spending way more money than I'd want to normally. But if we can do that, hang on to as many as we can and weather this storm this year. And hopefully, like we say every year, hopefully the weather's better next year. We've got some grass and the price of hay is a little bit lower. Then we can continue on and we'll have as many animals producing calves as we can in a stronger market. And that market might get stronger because a lot of people are selling their calves this year and their cows, pairs just like us. And so if we can hang on to those, then we'll be in a better position for this year or this coming year and next year. When we delivered that first load of calves and cows yesterday, those pairs, the brand inspector asked how I was doing. I said, well, not very good. And he goes, I get it. I understand. I say, yeah, we're not alone. He goes, no. There's a lot of guys doing the same thing. He says, and I feel for you. And people do. They genuinely, those that know, really do feel for us, have an understanding of what we're going through and what it's going to take to stay in business. These are things that can put people out of business. We're lucky that we don't owe money to a bank where you got a banker breathing down your neck wanting their money, because banks don't care. It's all about opportunity for them, and it's opportunity every year and every client. So we borrow from ourselves and borrow from our personal savings in order to make this happen and keep going in hopes that we'll be able to pay ourselves back with some opportunity and the way things are just lined up to be next year. With that, there's a bittersweetness to this. There's not much sweet to it, but the bitter part is some of those cows you saw getting unloaded earlier were some of them, the last ones my dad had, him and my mother worked for. And so that transition from their generation to my generation, that's the last of it. That's it. We've still got some progeny from some of those cows that we kept as good heifers and that are producing cows today, and I would not have sold all of those. But again, the age they are makes them less valuable, and it's the best we can do. So part of my heart hurts for that, but it is what it is, and we just keep going because those cows aren't going to last forever. They just weren't supposed to go this soon.
Thank you, Brandon. That was a very sobering video. And it reminds me of a couple of things about people who live in agriculture. There's a saying that they always live in next year country, that it's always going to be better next year. And if you didn't have that attitude, that you couldn't do it. Does that sum it up pretty well?
Well, I think it is. I think that's kind of a short term, because that's what keeps you going from year to year. But, you look at it also, which drives humanity in general, and that's hope.
Yeah.
It's really what it is.
Yeah.
So it's tough. It's a hard thing.
But one of the things that moved me the most, Brandon, was your insistence on trying to make something good out of this, trying to look forward and turning a challenge into an opportunity. I mean, that's where hope comes in. That's where hope laces into your language and into the way you look at something when there's something like this happens.
Well, you see a little bit of that, but honestly, you might see 3 parts hope or three parts optimism and 97 parts reality and despair. So you have to try to look at what's going to be the best thing, and you hope that you have made the right decision. You blame yourself if you don't, but if you do, then you attribute it to, well, we got lucky too. I mean, you don't try to have an ego that you've beaten something, because you haven't.
Yeah.
You've gotten lucky a lot, and I'll take luck every time, when it's offered.
Yeah. Well, nature's really in control on so many levels with the health of
Oh,
your
yeah.
herd, with the weather, with so many factors that you really know that you are not in control in a situation like you are. You can do your
Right.
best and still lose.
That's right. And still lose soundly
Yeah.
and lose to the point where you don't recover. Then that can happen.
Yeah. And one of the things that I was also struck by is, unlike a lot of jobs, almost everybody in every job has their ups and downs. And, a company can be on the verge and all of these aspects of it. But in agriculture, particularly in livestock agriculture, there's this emotional involvement with your livestock. And so, I mean, I could tell in your voice riding out there that this was a painful thing for you to do, to go out there and have to make this kind of a selection. As you pointed out very early on, that these cattle represent decades of work, and in terms of your selecting and that whole process of trying to create as good and efficient and healthy a herd as you possibly can. And so there's that emotional part that is overlaying everything.
Yeah, it is. And it's not just decades, but in a lot of cases, it's generations.
Yeah.
That you've worked, over those decades, that you forget about sometimes the people involved or what they've done, and every day is something that you have to do to keep going forward. And we'll show a snippet here and there, but that's kind of representative of all of the people behind us too.
And I think that's a perfect remark to pass the baton to your son. Kaylin, you've written another beautiful story, and I can't tell you how much I have enjoyed reading your stories and listening to your recordings. But
Thank you.
Everybody will agree once you've told them about and read your story how much hand in glove this is with what Brandon just showed us. So take it away, Kaylin.
Yeah, I don't know. Hello, folks. This is Kalen from the Hashknife Ranch, joining you at the Dunroven Ranch with one of my stories. This one is actually something that I came up with while I was home on leave in June of 2021, and it made me think of a lot of things. Some I've seen. You can probably see them on things like National Geographic or Discovery. There used to be a small series. I don't know if it's still around. I think it was called The Last American Cowboy or something. And there was a particular scene where the family had to make a decision relating to hay for the winter. And that made me think of some things that were happening this year. We were talking about cattle markets, high hay prices, because there's just honestly a really bad drought 2021, which made hay prices increase. We had to cut back on the herd in order to make a little bit of money for that hay. There's a lot of things, a lot of business decisions that are made. During that time when I was home on leave, those decisions were made in the car while we were driving to see friends, to go meet up during dinner or something like that. It might be a 30-minute car ride, but my mom, my dad, and I are on the phones talking to each other, sitting inside the cab of this car, discussing prices and trying to figure out what the market might be like. Again, that was in a car, but it made me think about my own family and how at one point we used to have similar conversations before my grandfather died, where we sat around a table, and much like that series that I was discussing earlier, we made the same decisions that those people made, and we are just one family of many that continue to do this, whether it be beef, hogs, sheep, it doesn't matter. Maybe even just crops in general. This is a real thing with the agricultural community, with families being a family business. Everybody is tied to it, whether they like it or not, until they leave, and then they either decide to return or to never come back. But all of those things stem from, to an extent, you pull the information and the knowledge from the older generation, but it's also sometimes a democracy too. Everybody kind of has their own vote. So while that's not the case in this story, it is kind of felt within the context of it. So with that, today I will be reading family business. Everyone sat around the small dining table. All eyes looked at the old man sitting near the end. He was quiet and thoughtful as he considered the situation. This was his 8th decade, and he had worked cattle over 70 years now. He knew how to move a pair simply by shifting his weight in the dirt. He had a knack for knowing when grass would be heavy and when it would be light. He understood the weather and the cycles he saw as he grew from a boy all the way to now. This one aspect, though, he never could predict: the market. He was aware of current events but needed details. His voice was like the strike of a gavel bringing the courtroom to order. All right, son, what are you hearing? The younger man looked at him from the opposite end of the table. There were no plates or food on the dining surface. It was hot outside, and everyone enjoyed a cold drink inside the air-conditioned home. But this was a business meeting, not a social gathering. All hands were brought from the pastures and corrals for this discussion. While nothing good from everyone I've talked to, the news keeps giving lousy numbers, and the reports on all the websites are not looking good. The best things we've heard came from the boys and their social media accounts. None of it official, just what people are sharing. The old man looked annoyed as he patiently listened to the convenience of phones, but he relented and looked at the 2 youngest men in the house, each in their 20s, but both hard workers and regularly looking through their devices. Boys, what have you got? He grumbled. The oldest tepidly entered the conversation. Grandpa, it's all current information, which means we can't use any of it to foresee October. I can only tell you the here and now. Frankly, most of it isn't local. The majority is in the Midwest. We are seeing not great, but decent prices for 500-600 pound calves. The problem is these are all summer sales. We still have 4 months to go before we are ready to pull the trigger, which leads to my other point. The future is very questionable. This year is hard on everyone, meaning we may likely be part of a bigger liquidation flood. When we sell, I anticipate others disposing of entire herds. We can't sell now, but if we do it in October, we may lose and lose bad. The information and analysis provided by his grandson was good, laid out facts and reasonable assumptions along with trends that gave a clear picture alongside national context. He may make a decent businessman with cattle yet. The old man furrowed his brow, crossed his arms, and reached at his wrinkled and clean-shaven chin to ponder their state of affairs. Never had he seen anything like this. Men were not squandering money and losing ranches by their own accord. They were getting pushed off family homesteads through cutthroat corporate business. Good businessmen and women were losing, and it was foreshadowing the family circumstances. He did not like any of this, but it was the 3 generations sitting at the table devising out a plan to survive the year that just might get them through. If only we can squeeze by to next year, he thought. After all his time on the ranch, this was a new issue. Meetings like this occurred so everyone could learn and take his counsel as the elder. He always had an answer. Everyone knew he would get them out, but this one, he was not so certain. Finally, he looked up and stared into everyone's eyes to comfort them. It did the opposite. It confirmed suspicions and only added unneeded stress. This was a family business. They might succeed, they might fail, but they would all do it together. Looking across the table at his son and ranch manager, he painfully said the unthinkable. I don't know, son. As his voice trailed off, those 4 words deflated the household. He had no answer for the first time in decades. There was no way to tell what to do until they were forced to play their hand. He sat back, sighed, and said, I guess we'll just have to wait it out and see. That was it, the verdict. They all gave a brisk nod, stood up from their chairs, and went back to work.
Kaylin, that was beautiful as always. And again, I'm really struck by the overlap with what your father just went through this last summer. Several things really stood out to me that I'd like to have both of you comment on. And that is that each generation was bringing their own perspective and their own knowledge. And one of the things that really struck me is the use of the technology by the younger generation, your generation, Kaylin. So I want to ask you, have you been contributing in this way to the family business? Is this a realistic depiction of what's going on?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure my dad will fill you in. He always has words, but the big thing is, and this is something as a kind of an aside. It's very male centric in this story, unfortunately, now that I'm thinking about it. But like my mother and my grandmother are very much part of this discussion as well. Because even though my mother never grew up in agriculture, she very much has grown with my father in their marriage and learned a lot of this too. And she adds to it as well. But when it comes to me and my brother, my brother helps here and there, but for me specifically, because I think partly because I am so far away from the family right now, I very much use technology. I'm on the computer. I use my smartphone to get stuff. And that story at the beginning of my reading, we were very much on the phone in the same car. My dad was driving and he was saying, "Hey, look up this place, look up that place, look up this place." And we were comparing prices back and forth. So yeah, definitely. There's 3 generations in that. We still, we use our own experiences, the old man using what he's known for the last 70 years to my dad for the last 40 or 50 years. And then for me, the last 20, but I also have a small computer in my hand.
Yeah, but it occurs to me, Brandon, and I'd like you to address this, that when you were a young man, when you were Kaylin's age, the changes on the ranch had not been as great for you and your father and your grandfather as they were between your grandfather, you, and Kaylin. The technological growth has just been so rapid and just so explosive, and that it seems to me that you had a more common set of circumstances intergenerationally a generation ago than you do now. Is that fair?
Technologically, I think in a way, yes. Information wise, there was a huge jump in technology and the use of what we did between my dad and my grandpa. And by that, I mean, everything that they did on the ranch when my grandpa was, in his 20s was done with draft horse.
Yeah.
And they bought their first, and he said it was an 8N Ford tractor that all you had to do was turn the key on it to get it ready to work and turn the key off to stop working. And he said, we put our harness away and we never went back to it. So my dad had a tiny bit of that, but not a lot. So that's a huge technological leap in one way that my dad and I didn't see that much of a difference. Television came along. Radio was still very much our main source of information. Even when I was in high school, we didn't have a television, but we had AM radio. And so you'd get the noon market reports. And I think that it just reminded me of that car ride we took. I was telling Kaylin, look up the Chicago Mercantile, because that's what you went by when I was a kid. And he goes, what? And I said, yeah, the Chicago Mercantile is probably where we're getting a lot of this information from, and look it up. And he's able to put that in the palm of his hand, where I had to go into the house and shut my mouth while we're eating when the market report came on, if we got lucky enough to stop when that happened. But my grandma would be there, or my mother would be there listening to the radio if we were not in the house to grab the market report. So now it's an instant. Then it was you came to that information. And so, but there's still a big leap between myself and Kaylin and Braden, because, I was joking earlier when we were off the air that my technological leap today was that I turned a light switch on. I struggle. And there's a lot there that I really should be able to manage myself. But I try and I struggle at it. But those two boys are they're wizards at this. It's second nature to them.
Oh.
I never saw a computer till I was in college, for God's sakes. And these kids grew up with them. So it's tough. But yeah, there are large leaps I see on each end of this, from my generation to Kaylin and Braden, and then from my dad to my grandpa, but not so much different between my dad and I. I don't see it that way. To me, those are giant leaps.
Yeah. The leap that your dad went through between you and his father was more technology used to alleviate the physical burdens, having a tractor versus draft horses, whereas the technology leap is more of an information thing. And let me ask you both, does this make your jobs more complicated in some ways? I mean, you've got all this information, but it's almost like feeding from a fire hose. I mean, you still have to whittle it down. Tell me about this, Kaylin, from your perspective.
Yeah, 100%. It's one of those things where While it's a benefit because now really there's four of us that really work the ranch, my mom, my dad, and then my brother and I, when we're home, we're able to do, in a sense, more with less. But at the same time, you also get more and more and more and more information that seems endless. And so sometimes you gotta take with the information that you have and do the best with what you've got, because otherwise you can get all the different types of information, studies, case studies from like the Kansas State University or Colorado State. That's a lot of the places where we pull information, and they might completely directly not agree with what you're trying to get towards in an end goal. So you just have to figure out what's the best for what we have, where animals land, and just run with it. Because if you get stuck on that information, it's going to make your life a whole lot worse than it really is.
I thought you really captured in your story, Kaylin, when you, at the very beginning of your story, you talked about how your grandfather was able to integrate so many things, by moving a cow, by turning in the dirt, all of these kind of things. That you end up with a feel. I mean, you have a physical feel for when things are right and when things are wrong. You feel the weather, you have all of that, but with data, you don't. So it's almost a different way of knowing. I mean, that the kind of knowing that data presents, as opposed to being out in the environment and judging the weather and judging all of that. Is that a fair statement?
Oh yeah. I would go a step further and say it's almost to an extent caused an issue with us and our generation, because now we have to relearn some of the old ways, understanding. I was looking at some videos with a discussion of my dad and my brother and I on Zoom from last November, and he was explaining things that he's trying to pass on to us so that we're successful in the future. And I realized it's one of those things where we're so inundated with the computers and the information, we still have to make sure we go out there and we learn it. Because if you don't know what a calf looks like when it has a certain disease or some telltale signs like droopy ears or dull eyes, you're going to miss those important things. So you still have to stay in tune with your roots, so to speak, or at least understand those basic cattleman skills so that you can still be a proper husband of animals and whatnot.
One of the things that I realized listening to his reading was I remember myself sitting at a table like that at his age or younger, and listening to my dad and my grandpa then, and not knowing what to do, what direction to go, but listening to them because they had been through something before. And, and I've said some things and said, now we don't want to do that, because now I'm relying on that same knowledge that I picked up from those two men, decades ago, because I've been through it before, but there's some things we haven't been through before. And so that's, and when you have that kind of data, and we're all science people except for Kalen. He's just a history guy, but the rest of us are all, it's all about science, so he's the lemon of the family. But
isn't that a distinction also, Brandon, from your father? You got a degree in biology, did you not?
Yeah.
And he did not have a degree in biology, did he?
No.
Yeah. So the education and information and the way it's presented has been creeping into your family structure, your family ranch structure in different ways across the generations.
That's correct.
One of the things I wanted both of you to touch on, and it was one of the questions that you suggested that I ask, Kaylin. You see, I can follow instructions once in a while. And I think it's a really good question. And that is, at what point do the children in a ranching operation begin to have a real say? And has that changed between generations? So let me ask you that question first, Kaylin, and then I'd love to hear Brandon relate his own childhood experiences.
Yeah, I think it depends on age, understanding, involvement is a big one. I know I noticed when I was in college, about midway through college, I would say something and I'd kind of get a look and be like, oh, that might not be a bad idea. Let's try it. And that's when I started realizing, oh, hey, my word carries a little bit more now. It definitely was not that in high school. In high school, it was, hey, go do the work and you might provide suggestions, but we're going to do it our way. And now, when it comes to other things, more digital involvement, because I've kind of helped bring us in a sense to the 21st century in terms of social media and whatnot. But in terms of that, like, I very much have a say, but it's very much based on my involvement. I can't physically be at the ranch. I'm 1,500 miles away. So how can I be involved? I can be involved through digital and computer work. So that's what I do. But yeah, it depends. I think a lot of involvement in what you are willing to put forth. Because if you're not willing to put forth any effort, I've seen some families where they have 6, 7 kids, and half the kids don't want to be involved, so they don't have a say. They can come around every holiday season and say, "Oh, you should do this, you should do that." Yeah, well, you're not here the other 360 days a year, so go away.
Brandon.
Yeah, that is very true, and it's hard for an old man to let go because you don't want to see mistakes be made, but at the same time, they have to make decisions and they have to critically think their way through them. And I try to help them critically think the way through the data. I mean, we kind of come back to that really quickly, but the data is sometimes not fit for our region or our area. And so you have to think, okay, you can't just count on that. Think about where we're at in our environment. But I think from my perspective, you see things and you watch them make decisions, and you watch them make good decisions, and watch them make decisions that they could do better at. And you try to step in and say, well, what if this happened? You start asking questions instead of telling.
Yeah.
And I'm not real good at that, honestly, a lot of times, because I see what needs to be done and you just want to do it. But that happened with me at a young age. My dad was off. He was off the ranch working. He had another job to go to. And my grandpa got real sick, very, very sick, nearly died. And we were in the middle of haying. I was 15 years old, and I ended up running that ranch by myself with 200 pair, did all of the rest of the haying and the irrigating, and was working some horses at 15 years old with no help. And so I did that until school started and a little bit after. And that, I think, garnered me a little bit of respect from my dad and my grandpa, but it's brutal. It's you think, man, I did a great job here. And, at the end of the summer, I said, hey, I think I did okay, because, we're still going. And then you kind of get your legs cut out from under you when the old man looks at you and he goes, yeah, you usually don't see that the business fails until a year later. So yeah, there's a little set of reality there too. Just because you do a good job in the moment doesn't mean it's the best job or that it's going to happen. So for me, it was a defining moment, but I think for my boys, they've grown into that, and they haven't had that baptism by fire, you might say, like I had to have, and I got lucky. I got very lucky. And so I see them make good decisions, and I can turn loose more and more.
So I'm going to come back to you, Kaylin, and ask you about your writing. You've chosen to use the third person as opposed to the first person. This is what might be called, creative nonfiction. I mean, you're putting it into third person, but there is a nonfiction aspect to this. It depicts much of your life. Why did you choose that particular style?
I couldn't tell you. Probably because if I said it in the first person, it'd just be a little awkward for me. I don't know. I think also the other thing too is as people get to kind of experience more and more of my stories, if you were to see each story in the first person, it probably wouldn't be appropriate. For example, myself for one that I hope to share early at some point, and that is there's a 4-part series, and it goes through different parts of stages of life. And if I were to do that in the first person, it would be very awkward, because the person goes from as a young man who's single to an older man who has kids that are old. So to say that and to have described in that manner when I'm clearly not an older man with kids that are in college or away from the house, that would be, I think, it'd be also dishonest in a sense. So I guess creatively, I enjoy doing the third person. And you can also, I think, argue you could probably see more from the third person than you can from the first person anyway. It's more of, looking at from that camera angle of a movie or something. You're just focused on that one person versus panning out. You can see the crowd. You can see what's going on in the setting around them.
That's a great answer. I agree with you. I mean, it does broaden your perspective if you try to put yourself in your father's shoes or your grandfather's shoes and think through. It's an opportunity for you to learn. That's one of the things about writing is you learn a lot as you do it.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. And so how long do these stories take to craft? How long did this story take to craft?
It depends on the story. If there's a story that I have a wild idea on, it might take me. There's some that I've had in the shoot for over a year now, and they're still sitting there as a sentence or a small paragraph. But some of these ones that I've shared, they've really total time, probably a couple hours over the course of several months. This particular story, I was really irritated and upset this summer. And I was in seclusion by myself in Texas in a hotel room while I was doing military training. So I used spare time, and I probably knocked this one out in a course of 10 hours total writing time with drafting and everything like that. But I was able to complete it in probably a couple of weeks just because I was focused on the subject matter, which is, the meat packing industry, the drought, the beef prices, everything just kind of coming together and me experiencing that. So I don't know, that probably took me only 3-4 weeks at most, but a total of somewhere between 10 to 12 hours. But then there's others, like I said, they're still sitting there a year and a half later with a couple sentences or a stanza or something, just sitting there on a piece of paper, waiting for me to come by and have a better idea on how to create it and make it come to its final form.
Well, keep at it, Kaylin. You've got a talent, and we enjoy sharing it with you.
Thank you.
I want to thank both of you. It's always a thrill to be in your presence and hear your stories. I want to tell our members that our friend Meredith will not be able to continue training Augie. She is involved with the Western Montana Humane Society, and they've been given a big job. There was a ranch up near Flathead that was confiscated by the sheriff's office recently, and a lot of animals involved. And she's been put in charge of finding homes and rescuing a wide variety of animals from this ranch. It was a hoarding situation. So that's going to take her kind of out of the picture for a while. But you know me, I've got something up my sleeve. I don't want to divulge it yet until I can pin it down or pin him down, as the case may be. But we'll be back with Augie and teletraining later in the spring. But until then, I hope we can count on you, Brandon, to come with us every week with something from your ranch. We so enjoy it.
Yeah, we've got a few things that we've already produced and Kaylin has edited, and we're ready to go. And I am continuing to build a few things, which sometimes I think, why would anybody want to watch this? And some of the ones that are the wildly, just incredibly popular. So, I may give you nothing but television snow one day and say, boy, it's blowing out here, and watch that for 20 minutes. So, I'm capable of that, right?
That's reality. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we'll be with you.
So, Kaylin, thank you for making the time for us. I know that you don't have a lot of agency over your time. The military has control over where you are and when you are, and thank you for donating your time to make the videos and to read the stories and just bringing it all together. We're just very grateful.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and of course always inviting me. I enjoy coming and visiting you guys, and especially talking to you, Suzanne. I have to talk to you every week, but get to talk to you is nice. But yeah, absolutely. Happy New Year, and appreciate being here.
Thank you all. And thank you to our members for joining us. It's been a real pleasure, and I'll see you on the chat, and we'll see you next week, Brandon.
All right. Well, look forward to it.
Thank you.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year. Bye.
Bye-bye.